There is no note sheet today. So, what we're going to do, gentlemen, thank you. I know it was a little crazy there at the beginning to kind of see we're actually on to task now. We're going to make a couple of changes to the practice before we even get started, and then we're going to chat about a couple of weird things that can come up that might screw up our way of doing our standard form here. So like it mentions on here, okay, 1 through 3 we're going to keep. What's the vertex? What's the axis of symmetry? No graphing. We'll get to that in a second. Okay. Then when we get to 4 through 7, we're going to graph those. What's the graph? Find the vertex, find the axis of symmetry. Now, when life changes is when we get to the back. When we make it to the back, we're changing the directions. Okay? We're going to scratch what's the vertex form, because again, that takes us into something we're not dealing with right now. So here, we're going to keep on graphing and finding the vertex and the axis of symmetry. The practice is going to do us good, but on a happy note, we are going to scratch out number 12 because, well, we don't have enough graphs otherwise. We have 8 graphs. We can have 8 equations that we're working with. So that's basically the changes we're going to be making. Now, I want to take a look at a few of these because there's a few things going on today that could cause us an issue. And I want to make sure we know how to deal with those, or at least have an adjustment ready. So we're going to go back to the front, and we're going to start here at number 4. Okay, so when we're doing the graph on this, and I'm actually going to switch over to my graph paper here so we can see how this is going to work. So this is the 4.2 practice K. We're going to start up here with our first graph with number 4. Let me just write it next to it here so because it says form K on there, it's just a way for me to be able to see which worksheet it is we're working on here. So I look at this and I say, okay, if we go after this the way that we did yesterday when we were doing standard form, my first thing I'm dealing with on all of these is to find my x value. I'm going to use this little mini formula, this negative b over 2a. So again, just as a reminder to myself, I'm going to jot down my a, the number in front of x squared, my b, the number in front of x, and my c, my constant term, the number at the end, the negative 11. Now they all can come into use, but we're going to see if it actually helps us or not here. So, negative b over 2a. All right, let's see here. The opposite of b, the opposite of negative 6 is positive 6, so we'll get that in there. And then 2 times a, 2 times negative 1. And we talked a little bit yesterday about if I'm going to put this in the calculator, which I don't think I need to because these are kind of small numbers. I want to get this cleaned up and get that situated. So there's my x value. Okay, I've got that part of my vertex ready to go. To get y, I'm going to take this expression, and every time I see an x, I'm going to plug in a negative 3. Now here's the kicker. There's a negative here already. Okay, leave that there, and then our negative 3 gets substituted in for the x. It doesn't cancel out the negative. That negative is still there. So I get that worked out. And that I probably would with all those negatives and stuff. I wouldn't blame you for going to the calculator on this one. So again, type carefully. Don't lose any negatives. I get my y value. So then we think we've got everything we need to be be able to graph our line. So I know my vertex is at -3. Whoops, let me pull that back up for a minute. Okay, -3, -2. So once I have that, -3, -2, plot my point. When we did this yesterday, our next task became to plot the y-intercept. Now sometimes that'll still work. Because remember, my y-intercept was just 0 and whatever my c value was. In this case, that'll work okay. 0, -11. Okay, because that's just a little bit off my graph. And I've got my axis of symmetry, which again is just going to be the x value of my vertex. So again, that just means we've got this dotted line working. And to get my last point so I can graph, I count from my y-intercept to the line. I go, okay, it's 1, 2, 3 to get there. So then I count 1, 2, 3 more and put my last dot. Now, let's say sometime you get one of these and the y-intercept is like 40. You're like, that doesn't fit on my graph. What am I supposed to do? Good question. So here's our backup plan. And I'll kind of use it on one where we know what's going to happen here. So in that case, I'd go to my calculator. I'd type in my expression. I'd go to my table, and just like before, okay, here's my vertex. I'm going to get that in the middle. So I want -3, -2 in the middle. I see my symmetry, just like when we did it in vertex form, and I would use those points to help me graph it if I got one that didn't fit. So like I could get some extra points this way. I could plot those in. Now again, do I have to if I get my intercept and it fits? No. But I want you to see that that is an option there for you. I still want to calculate my vertex no matter which way I do this. But if the y-intercept doesn't happen to work, it doesn't mean I can't do it. That's what I'm kind of trying to get across here. Okay. So let's see here. I'm trying to see some other ones that would be helpful as we're trying to pick through here. Ooh, that's crazy. Okay, let's do that. It's okay if we do them a little out of order here. We're going to go to number 9. Number 9's got some funky stuff that's going to be going on here. And again, if I do something as you're doing this, whether it's, wait a minute, how'd you do that calculator thing again? Or, wait, where did that y-intercept number come from? Talk to me. That's the stuff we want to get cleaned up. Because that way when I let you loose here in a little bit, you're going to be ready to just roll. Okay, so 9. Let me get it written down here. It looks innocent enough. So I'm like, okay. I like writing my A, B, and C values down just so I don't forget them. Sometimes that can be helpful, sometimes maybe not so much. So, okay. Let's do this here. Let's find our vertex. So we've got the opposite of B, so -2 over 2 times A. Ooh, now be careful. This is one of those things, sometimes our eyes can trick us. Because sometimes we look at that and our brains tell us we see 4 divided by 2 and we write -2. But it's not because the bigger number's down below. So if you're not sure sometime, and again, I don't like decimals, so Okay, so my x value, ooh, is -1/2. Ugh. That's not going to be much fun to deal with here. Because when I get to y then, I've got to go back, and every time I see an x, I've got to plug in negative 1/2. Now, I wouldn't expect anybody to necessarily like playing with that without a calculator. I don't blame you at all. So, again, as long as I'm careful when I'm typing it in and don't forget a negative somewhere or something, this is doable. Okay, now 3.5. Now you're going to be like, wait a minute, you just told me a minute you don't like decimals, and now you're telling me this might be okay. Well, let's think about that. 3.5 would be the same thing as negative 3.5. Okay, I still can kind of get fractional with this. So I go, okay, my vertex is at negative 1/2, negative 3.5. So let's see, negative 1/2, negative 3.5. Put my dot. So I'm like, okay, well, let's see if the y-intercept helps this time or not. So y-intercept. My c value is 4, so it'd be at 0, 0, 4. Okay. That might not be too bad. Well, let's see. If that's the case, my axis of symmetry is that x equals negative 1/2. Oops, did I go over too far? Oh, I did. Harty. Negative 1/2. This is where I wish I had white out. You're like, okay, so how do I do this? Because what you've got here, once you work through, looks kind of goofy. I mean, that's really close. It's like not even a full one. So do I just do like half? So it's like right over here? And you're like, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of squished. But that can happen sometimes when we get into some of these. So it's something I just kind of work with. It's so skinny. I know, some of them, it can get kind of weird looking when we're doing some of this. And I even saved the craziest looking one here for at the end. So I get here, and then I go, all right, one more. Now again, you can, and let me keep stressing this, you could go to the calculator on one like this. Now, the only thing I'll tell you is if you have a fraction in for your x-axis, that you're not going to see the symmetry that you would normally see. That's the only thing that kind of stinks about going to the calculator. If it's whole numbers, it'll be nice for you. If it's not, well, it gets a little tricky. Okay, last one, at least I'm planning on playing with here. So I look and I'm like, okay, A is 1/2, B is -6, C is 15. So I get here and I go, okay, let's see what we got. X equals opposite of B, opposite of -6 is 6, over 2 times A. Don't let the fraction freak you out. Okay, let's forget about the 6 for a second. Half of 2 is 1. Okay, so my x value of my vertex is 6. Well, that was nice at least. And then again, I plug it back in to my expression. And again, I can pop that into the calculator. I'm actually, I think, going to be brave and try to work this out. 36, half of 36 is 18. Minus 36 plus 15. Negative 18 plus 15 is negative 3. So my vertex is at 6, negative 3. My axis of symmetry is going to be at x equals 6. So let's see. 6, negative 3. I've got my axis. Now here's where life starts to get a little complicated. My y-intercept is at 0, 15. And you may notice when you look like over at number 11, it's at negative 29. That's a little bit of a problem for our graph. This is one of those situations that I would grab my calculator and I'd say, okay, I'm not going to try and beat this one myself here. So I'm going to go ahead and get this typed into the calculator. And again, if you're using, one of the plus silvers, like the one that I've got here, okay, the black/silver type ones, you're probably going to have to go this route. If you've got the yellow ones, they may put this into a fraction for you already. It kind of depends on the operating system. So I'm going to look at the chart. And again, my key is to get my vertex in the middle. And you notice the numbers are a lot more reasonable for me to work with than they were dealing with 0, 15. So I go ahead and I go, okay, so let's see here. So at 7, I'm at negative 2.5, and at 5, I'm at negative 2.5. 4, I'm at negative 1 and negative 1. And it's much more reasonable to do it that way. Okay, so all I'm saying is you have options. If you've got a y-intercept that's under 10, I would use that because that's going to make things go faster. But if you're more comfortable finding the vertex and using the calculator every time, there's nothing wrong with that. So again, basically, besides the first 3 where you're just finding the vertex and axis of symmetry and not graphing, we're just doing basically what we did here. It's practice to make sure when it comes time for a quiz later next week that you're ready and raring to go for it. So do get the practice. I'm finishing up the graphs on the key right now, and